Sarah Mitchell pressed her face against the small airplane window, watching the clouds drift past like cotton balls scattered across an endless blue canvas. She shifted uncomfortably in seat 13F, the middle seat of the Boeing 737 that was carrying her from Denver to Washington, D.C. The man next to her was snoring softly, his newspaper folded neatly on his lap, while the woman by the aisle typed furiously on her laptop, completely absorbed in her work. At 34 years old, Sarah had taken this flight dozens of times over the past 3 years. She was a government contractor specializing in military communications systems, and her job required frequent travel between the headquarters in Colorado and various military installations across the country. Today's trip was supposed to be routine, a simple presentation about new radio protocols for the Pentagon brass. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, just another business trip in a long series of business trips that had become her life. Sarah tucked a strand of her brown hair behind her ear and glanced at her watch. They were about 40 minutes into the 2-hour flight, cruising at 35,000 feet somewhere over Kansas. The pilot had announced clear skies ahead, and the flight attendants were making their way down the aisle with the beverage service. Everything was perfectly normal, exactly as it should be. What Sarah didn't know was that her life was about to change forever in the next few minutes. She pulled out her phone to check her emails, even though she knew there would be no signal at this altitude. It was a habit she couldn't break, that constant need to stay connected to work. As a single woman with no children and few close friends, work had become her entire world. She lived alone in a small apartment in Aurora, Colorado, and most of her social interactions happened in conference rooms and military briefings. The flight attendant, a cheerful woman in her 50s with silver hair, stopped at their row. "What can I get you to drink?" she asked with a practiced smile. "Just water, please," Sarah replied, closing her phone and sliding it back into her purse. The attendant handed her a small plastic cup filled with ice water, and Sarah thanked her politely. She took a sip and went back to staring out the window, lost in thought about the presentation she would give tomorrow morning. The slides were already loaded on her laptop, and she had practiced her speech at least a dozen times. She was prepared, as always. Sarah had always been the type of person who flew under the radar. In high school, she was the quiet girl who got good grades but never drew attention to herself. In college, she studied electrical engineering and graduated near the top of her class, but she never joined sororities or went to parties. Even now, in her professional life, she was known for her competence and reliability rather than her personality or charisma. She did her job well, submitted her reports on time, and went home to her empty apartment. The irony was that Sarah had once dreamed of being anything but invisible. As a little girl, she had wanted to be a pilot, soaring through the sky in a fighter jet, protecting her country and making a difference. She used to spend hours in her backyard, arms outstretched, pretending to fly missions over enemy territory. Her bedroom walls were covered with pictures of military aircraft, and she could identify every type of fighter jet by its silhouette. But life had a way of redirecting dreams. When she got to high school, her guidance counselor told her that becoming a military pilot was extremely difficult, especially for women. The competition was fierce, and the physical requirements were demanding. Instead, he suggested she consider engineering, where she could still work with aircraft but in a safer, more stable environment. Sarah had listened to that advice and followed the practical path. She went to Colorado State University, earned her degree in electrical engineering, and landed a job with a defense contractor immediately after graduation. For 12 years, she had worked on various military projects, designing and testing communication systems for everything from tanks to aircraft carriers. It was good work, important work, but it wasn't the adventure she had once imagined for herself. The airplane hit a small pocket of turbulence, causing Sarah to grip her armrest instinctively. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and reassuring. "Folks, we're experiencing some light chop here. Nothing to worry about, just a little bumpy air. We should be through it in a few minutes. Sarah relaxed her grip and went back to looking out the window. Below them, the landscape stretched endlessly in all directions: farmland, small towns, highways that looked like thin ribbons from this height. She wondered about the people in those towns, going about their daily lives, probably never thinking about the airplane passing overhead or the woman in seat 13F who was questioning every choice she had ever made. Her phone buzzed in her purse, and she pulled it out to see a text message from her boss, David Martinelli. Even at 35,000 feet, somehow the message had gotten through. Sarah, change of plans. After your Pentagon meeting, you need to head straight to Langley AFB. They're having issues with the new communication array. Can you handle it? Sarah stared at the message for a moment, then typed back a quick yes, of course, even though she wasn't sure the message would send. Langley Air Force Base in Virginia was home to the 1st Fighter Wing, one of the most prestigious fighter squadrons in the Air Force. She had never been there before, but she had worked on communication systems for their F-22 Raptors remotely. The F-22 Raptor was the most advanced fighter jet in the world, a stealth aircraft capable of flying faster than the speed of sound. Sarah had always felt a special connection to the Raptor project, even though her role was small and behind the scenes. When she worked on the radio systems that would be installed in those jets, she sometimes imagined the pilots who would use them, flying dangerous missions in defense of their country. She wondered what those pilots were like. Were they the fearless, confident warriors she had always pictured? Or were they just regular people doing an extraordinary job? She had met a few military pilots over the years at various briefings and conferences, but they had always seemed larger than life to her, like characters from a movie rather than real human beings. The turbulence had stopped, and the flight was smooth again. Sarah finished her water and tried to get comfortable for the remainder of the flight. She pulled a technical manual from her carry-on bag and flipped through the pages, reviewing the specifications for the new communication protocols she would be discussing at the Pentagon. The diagrams and charts were familiar to her, almost comforting in their precision and logic. As she read, her mind wandered back to her childhood dreams of flying. She remembered the day she had finally worked up the courage to take a discovery flight at a small airport near her hometown. She was 16 years old, and her father had driven her there on a Saturday morning. The instructor was a former Air Force pilot who had offered to take her up in a small Cessna to see if she had the aptitude for flying. Sarah remembered every detail of that flight: the sound of the engine starting up, the feeling of the airplane lifting off the ground, the incredible view of the world below. For 30 minutes, she had felt truly alive in a way she had never experienced before or since. The instructor had let her take the controls for a few minutes, and she had felt the airplane respond to her touch like it was an extension of her own body. When they landed, the instructor had smiled and told her she was a natural pilot. "You've got good hands," he said. "If you're serious about this, you should consider the Air Force Academy." But when Sarah got home and told her parents about the flight, their reaction was less enthusiastic. Her mother worried about the dangers of military flying, and her father was concerned about the cost of flight training. They encouraged her to focus on her studies and consider more practical career options. Sarah had listened to them, as she always did, and put aside her dreams of flying. Now, 18 years later, sitting in seat 13F of a commercial airliner, Sarah wondered what her life would have been like if she had ignored their advice and followed her heart instead. Would she be flying F-22 Raptors right now, defending American airspace and living the adventure she had always craved? Or would she have washed out of flight training and ended up in the same place anyway? The airplane began its descent into Washington, D.C., and Sarah could see the city sprawling below them. The Pentagon, the Capitol building, the Washington Monument, all the symbols of American power and democracy were laid out beneath her like pieces on a game board. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into one of those buildings and give her presentation to a room full of military officers and government officials. She had given hundreds of similar presentations over the years, but for some reason, this one felt different. Maybe it was the unexpected trip to Langley Air Force Base, or maybe it was just the mood that had settled over her during the flight. Whatever it was, Sarah had the strangest feeling that this trip was going to be more significant than she had anticipated. The landing was smooth, and, within minutes, the passengers were standing up and gathering their belongings from the overhead bins. Sarah collected her carry-on bag and laptop case and joined the slow procession toward the front of the airplane. The flight attendant smiled and thanked each passenger for flying with them, and Sarah nodded politely as she passed. Walking through the terminal at Reagan National Airport, Sarah felt the familiar energy of Washington, D.C. The sense that important decisions were being made all around her, that the fate of the free world was being determined in conference rooms and briefings just like the one she would attend tomorrow. It was both exciting and intimidating, and she found herself walking a little faster, as if she could absorb some of that energy simply by moving through it. She caught a taxi to her hotel in Arlington, watching the city pass by outside the window. The driver was listening to a talk radio show about foreign policy, and Sarah found herself paying attention to the discussion about military readiness and defense spending. These were the issues that affected her work, the broader context that gave meaning to the technical details she dealt with every day. At the hotel, Sarah checked in and went straight to her room on the 8th floor. She set her laptop on the small desk by the window and opened it to review her presentation one more time. But, as she scrolled through the slides, her mind kept drifting back to the text message from her boss about Langley Air Force Base. She had never worked directly with F-22 pilots before. Her previous assignments had involved cargo planes, transport aircraft, and older fighter jets that didn't have the advanced communication systems of the Raptor. The F-22 was different. It was the cutting edge of military aviation, and the pilots who flew it were among the most skilled and experienced in the world. Sarah opened a new browser window and searched for information about the first fighter wing at Langley. The official website showed pictures of sleek F-22 Raptors lined up on the tarmac, their angular stealth design making them look like something from a science fiction movie. She read about the wing's mission: air superiority, maintaining American control of the skies, deterring potential enemies. The pilots featured on the website looked exactly like what she had expected: confident, professional, with the kind of easy competence that comes from years of training and experience. Their call signs were listed alongside their photos: Viper, Ghost, Thunder, Phoenix. These weren't just names, Sarah realized, they were identities forged in the crucible of military aviation. She wondered what it would be like to have a call sign, to be known by something other than her plain, everyday name. Sarah Mitchell was fine for government contracts and technical reports, but it didn't exactly inspire fear in enemy pilots or confidence in Allied forces. She tried to imagine what call sign she might have earned if she had become a pilot, but nothing came to mind. The next morning, Sarah woke early and spent an extra few minutes getting ready. She chose her most professional outfit, a navy blue suit with a white blouse that her mother had bought for her 3 years ago. Looking in the mirror, she saw the same person she always saw: competent, reliable, forgettable Sarah Mitchell. But, today, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she wished she looked different. More confident, more important, more like someone who belonged in the world she was about to enter. The Pentagon was exactly what she had expected: massive, imposing, and filled with the kind of serious people who made serious decisions about serious things. Sarah presented her credentials at the security checkpoint and was escorted through a maze of corridors to Conference Room 3A, where a dozen military officers and civilian contractors were already seated around a long table. Her presentation went smoothly. She explained the new communication protocols, demonstrated the improved security features, and answered questions about implementation timelines and costs. The officers nodded approvingly and asked technical questions that showed they understood the significance of her work. When it was over, several people approached her to discuss details and exchange business cards. "Excellent work, Ms. Mitchell," said Colonel James Patterson, a stern-looking man with silver hair who had introduced himself as the project coordinator. "The Joint Chiefs are very pleased with these developments. This technology could give us a significant advantage in future conflicts." Sarah thanked him and gathered her materials. As she was packing up her laptop, Colonel Patterson approached her again. "I understand you're heading to Langley next," he said. "The 1st Fighter Wing is having some issues with their communication array. Your expertise could be very valuable to them." "I'm looking forward to it, sir," Sarah replied, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "The F-22 pilots are the best in the world," Patterson continued. "But they're also perfectionists. They expect their equipment to work flawlessly, every time. If there's a problem with their communication systems, they won't hesitate to speak up about it." Sarah nodded, understanding the implication. This wasn't just a technical problem to be solved, it was a matter of trust between the pilots and their equipment. If the communication systems failed during a mission, it could mean the difference between life and death. As she left the Pentagon and caught a taxi to Reagan National Airport for her connecting flight to Norfolk, Sarah felt a familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had always thrived on, a complex technical problem that required both expertise and creativity to solve. But there was something else, too, something she couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the prospect of finally working directly with F-22 pilots, the kind of aviators she had always admired from afar. Or maybe it was just the sense that this assignment was different from all the others, that somehow it would matter more than the routine maintenance and upgrades that usually filled her schedule. The flight to Norfolk was shorter than her morning trip from Denver, just over an hour of smooth flying over the Virginia countryside. As the airplane descended toward the airport, Sarah could see military installations scattered across the landscape below: Norfolk Naval Base, Oceana Naval Air Station, and, in the distance, Langley Air Force Base. From the air, Langley looked like any other military base: runways, hangars, administrative buildings arranged in neat geometric patterns. But Sarah knew that somewhere down there, the most advanced fighter jets in the world were being prepared for missions that most people could never imagine. And, tomorrow morning, she would be part of that world, if only for a few days. She had no way of knowing that her life was about to change completely, that the quiet, invisible Sarah Mitchell who had boarded a routine flight from Denver that morning was about to discover something about herself that she had never suspected. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The rental car smelled like artificial pine air freshener and coffee, and the GPS kept recalculating the route to Langley Air Force Base as Sarah navigated through Hampton Roads traffic. She had arrived at Norfolk International Airport just after 3 in the afternoon, and now she was making the 30-minute drive to what would become the most important destination of her life. The landscape around her was quintessentially military Virginia: strip malls, fast food restaurants, and car dealerships that catered to young service members with their military discount signs prominently displayed. Every few miles, she passed another gate leading to another military installation, each one protected by serious-looking guards and concrete barriers that spoke to the dangerous realities of modern warfare. Sarah had called ahead to arrange her arrival at Langley, and she was scheduled to meet with Major Tom Harrison, the communications officer for the 1st Fighter Wing, at 4:30. According to the brief phone conversation they had shared that morning, the wing was experiencing intermittent failures in their secure communication systems, problems that could ground their F-22 fleet if not resolved quickly. As she approached the main gate at Langley Air Force Base, Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly. She had worked on military bases before, but never one that housed the Air Force's premier fighter squadron. This was where America's best pilots trained for missions that could determine the outcome of future conflicts, where billion-dollar aircraft were maintained and prepared for operations around the world. The security checkpoint was more thorough than most. 2 Air Force security police officers examined her credentials, checked her name against multiple lists, and inspected both her rental car and her equipment bags. One of them made a phone call to confirm her appointment, speaking in low tones that Sarah couldn't quite hear. After 15 minutes of careful scrutiny, they handed her a visitor's badge and gave her detailed directions to the 1st Fighter Wing headquarters. "Ma'am," said the younger of the two guards, a serious-looking airman who couldn't have been more than 25 years old, "you'll need to stay with your escort at all times while you're on base. This is a high-security installation." Sarah nodded and clipped the visitor's badge to her jacket. As she drove through the gate and onto the base proper, she was struck by how clean and organized everything was. The buildings were painted in regulation Air Force blue and gray, the lawns were perfectly manicured, and every road sign was crisp and clearly marked. This was a place where attention to detail wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. The 1st Fighter Wing headquarters was a modern 3-story building that looked more like a corporate office complex than a military facility. Sarah parked in the designated visitor area and gathered her laptop bag and toolbox from the trunk. She had packed everything she might need to diagnose and repair communication system problems, from basic circuit testers to advanced signal analyzers. The lobby was decorated with photographs and displays showcasing the history of the 1st Fighter Wing. Sarah stopped to examine some of the pictures: F-22 Raptors in formation flight, pilots in full gear standing next to their aircraft, award ceremonies and deployment photos. The men and women in these pictures looked exactly like what she had always imagined fighter pilots would look like: confident, focused, and completely at home in their dangerous profession. "Ms. Mitchell?" A voice behind her made her turn around. A tall, lean man in a flight suit was walking toward her with his hand extended. "I'm Major Tom Harrison. Thanks for coming down here on such short notice." Sarah shook his hand and was immediately struck by his firm grip and direct gaze. Major Harrison looked to be in his late 30s, with close-cropped brown hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of flying in harsh conditions. His flight suit was adorned with various patches and insignia that Sarah didn't recognize, but they clearly marked him as someone important in the world of military aviation. "Not a problem, Major," Sarah replied. "I understand you're having issues with your communication systems." "That's putting it mildly," Harrison said, leading her toward a bank of elevators. "We've had 3 separate failures in the past week, all during critical training exercises. The pilots are getting frustrated, and, frankly, so am I. When our comms go down, we might as well be flying museum pieces instead of the most advanced fighters in the world." They rode the elevator to the 2nd floor, and Harrison led her down a corridor lined with offices and briefing rooms. Through the windows, Sarah could see the flight line where dozens of F-22 Raptors were parked in neat rows. Even from a distance, the aircraft looked sleek and deadly, their angular stealth design making them appear almost alien compared to the older fighters she had worked with in the past. "How familiar are you with the Raptor's communication suite?" Harrison asked as they walked. "I helped design some of the protocols during the development phase," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I've never worked on an operational aircraft." Harrison stopped walking and looked at her with surprise. "You worked on the development? That was, 10 years ago?" 12 years ago, Sarah corrected. "I was fresh out of college, just a junior engineer on the team. I probably spent more time getting coffee for the senior engineers than I did actually designing anything." "Don't sell yourself short," Harrison said, resuming their walk. "The Raptor's communication systems are some of the most advanced ever developed. If you had any role in creating them, you're exactly the person we need to fix them." They arrived at a large briefing room where several pilots were already seated around a conference table. Sarah's first thought was that they looked exactly like Central Casting's idea of fighter pilots: young, fit, and exuding the kind of easy confidence that came from mastering one of the most difficult professions in the world. But, as she looked more closely, she noticed details that complicated that simple impression. The pilot closest to her was a woman, perhaps Sarah's age, with short blonde hair and laugh lines around her eyes that suggested someone who didn't take herself too seriously despite flying a $100 million aircraft. Next to her sat a man who looked barely old enough to drive, let alone pilot a supersonic fighter jet, but the patches on his flight suit indicated he was already an experienced combat veteran. "Gentlemen and lady," Harrison said, addressing the room, "this is Sarah Mitchell from Advanced Communications Systems. She's here to help us figure out why our radios keep cutting out at the worst possible moments." The pilots murmured greetings, and Sarah felt suddenly self-conscious in her business suit surrounded by all these flight suits. She had always felt more comfortable with machines than with people, and this room was full of the kind of confident, accomplished people who made her feel inadequate by comparison. "Ms. Mitchell," said the blonde woman, standing up to shake her hand, "I'm Captain Lisa Phoenix Rodriguez. I've been having the most trouble with comm failures, so you'll probably want to start with my aircraft." Sarah shook her hand, noticing the callousness that came from years of handling flight controls and the quiet strength in her grip. Phoenix, that was one of the call signs she had seen on the website. Meeting the person behind the call sign was somehow different than she had expected. Captain Rodriguez seemed more approachable, more human, than the larger-than-life figure Sarah had imagined. "What kind of failures are you experiencing?" Sarah asked, pulling out a notebook to take notes. "Mostly intermittent drops during high-G maneuvers," Rodriguez explained. "Last week during a training mission, I lost all communication for almost 30 seconds while pulling 7GS in a defensive turn. In a real combat situation, 30 seconds of radio silence could get me killed." The young-looking pilot spoke up next. "I'm Lieutenant Jake Ghost Morrison. I've had similar problems, but mine seem to happen during high-speed runs rather than high-G turns. Yesterday I was pushing Mach 1.8 when everything just went dead. Tower couldn't reach me, my wingman couldn't reach me, I might as well have been flying solo over enemy territory." Sarah wrote down their descriptions, noting the common factors. High-stress flight conditions, extreme G-forces, high speeds, all situations where communication was most critical and failure most dangerous. She was already forming hypotheses about potential causes, but she would need to examine the actual aircraft and their communication systems to be sure. "When can I look at the aircraft?" she asked Major Harrison. "How about right now?" he replied. "Phoenix, can you show Ms. Mitchell to your bird?" Captain Rodriguez nodded and stood up. "Follow me. And, please, call me Lisa. All this formal rank stuff gets old pretty quickly." As they left the briefing room, Sarah found herself walking alongside one of the most skilled pilots in the world toward one of the most advanced aircraft ever built. Just that morning, she had been giving a routine presentation at the Pentagon, and now she was about to crawl around inside an F-22 Raptor trying to solve problems that could affect national security. The walk to the flight line took them through a series of security checkpoints, each one more stringent than the last. By the time they reached the aircraft hangar, Sarah had been photographed, fingerprinted, and made to sign several documents promising not to reveal anything she might see or learn during her visit. "Welcome to the world of black projects," Lisa said with a smile as they walked through the final checkpoint. "Everything about the Raptor is classified, from its exact top speed to the color of the toilet paper in the pilot's lounge." The hangar was enormous, easily large enough to house a dozen aircraft with room to spare. But Sarah's attention was immediately drawn to the single F-22 Raptor that dominated the space. Up close, the aircraft was even more impressive than she had imagined. Its smooth, angular surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and every line and curve spoke to its dual purposes of stealth and lethality. "This is tail number 05-4086, Lisa said, running her hand along the aircraft's wing. "I call her Lady Liberty, though that's not exactly official. I've been flying her for 2 years now, and she's never let me down, except for these comm problems." Sarah approached the aircraft slowly, almost reverently. She had worked on fighter jets before, but never one like this. The F-22 represented the absolute pinnacle of military aviation technology, a machine that cost more than some small countries' entire defense budgets. To actually touch it, to work on it, felt like a privilege she had never expected to receive. "Where do you want to start?" Lisa asked. "The communication array," Sarah replied, setting down her toolbox. "Can you show me where the primary antenna assemblies are located?" For the next 2 hours, Sarah crawled through the aircraft's communication systems with a thoroughness that impressed even Lisa, who had thought she knew every inch of her airplane. Sarah tested circuits, measured signal strengths, and traced wiring paths with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years learning to read the electronic signatures of complex systems. What she found wasn't what anyone had expected. "The hardware is fine," Sarah announced as she climbed down from the aircraft's electronics bay. "All the components are working perfectly, well within specification. The problem isn't mechanical." "Then, what is it?" Lisa asked. Sarah wiped her hands on a shop towel and looked thoughtful. "It's in the software. Specifically, it's in the frequency management protocols. During high-stress flight conditions, the system is trying to switch between communication channels faster than the processors can handle. It creates a temporary buffer overflow that drops all communications for whatever period of time it takes the system to reset itself." Lisa stared at her. "You figured that out in 2 hours?" "Our maintenance guys have been working on this problem for 3 weeks. Sometimes it helps to have fresh eyes," Sarah said modestly. "Plus, I helped write some of the original code. I know where the weak points are likely to be." "Can you fix it?" Sarah nodded. "I'll need to modify the frequency management algorithms and update the firmware on all your aircraft. It's not a difficult fix once you know what the problem is, but it will take some time to implement across your entire fleet." As they walked back toward the headquarters building, Lisa looked at Sarah with newfound respect. "You know, when Major Harrison said a contractor was coming to look at our comm problems, I was expecting some guy in a tie who would spend 3 days running diagnostic tests and, then, tell us to contact the manufacturer." "I am a contractor," Sarah pointed out. "Yeah, but you're different. You actually know what you're doing. And you care about getting it right." Lisa paused at the entrance to the building. "These aircraft aren't just machines to us, you know. They're our partners, our protectors. When something goes wrong with them, it's personal." Sarah understood what she meant. During her 2 hours working on the F-22, she had felt a connection to the aircraft that went beyond mere professional interest. This wasn't just another repair job, it was about ensuring that pilots like Lisa could do their jobs safely and effectively. "How long will you be here?" Lisa asked. "Probably 3 or 4 days," Sarah replied. "I need to check all the aircraft in the squadron and make sure the fix works properly before I leave." "Good. That gives us time to properly introduce you to the squadron. We're having a barbecue this weekend, pilots, maintenance crews, support staff. You should come." Sarah hesitated. She wasn't good at social situations, especially with groups of people she didn't know well. But something about Lisa's genuine friendliness made her want to say yes. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I'm not really the party type." "It's not a party," Lisa insisted. "It's a squadron gathering. We do this every month, just good people getting together over good food. Besides, after you fix our comms, you'll be an honorary member of the squadron. You should meet everyone." That evening, back in her hotel room, Sarah worked late into the night developing the software patches that would solve the communication problems. It was detailed, painstaking work that required her to review thousands of lines of code and identify the exact sequences that were causing the failures. But, as she worked, her mind kept drifting back to her day at Langley. Meeting Lisa and the other pilots had been different from what she had expected. They weren't the distant, larger-than-life figures she had imagined. They were real people doing an extraordinary job, and they had treated her like a valuable team member rather than just another contractor. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was part of something important, something bigger than herself. The work she was doing wasn't just about fixing technical problems, it was about ensuring that America's best pilots could do their job of protecting the country. It was the kind of meaningful work she had always wanted to do but had never quite found. As she finally closed her laptop and prepared for bed, Sarah made a decision. She would attend the squadron barbecue on Saturday. She would step out of her comfortable, invisible shell and try to connect with these remarkable people who had welcomed her so readily. She had no idea that this simple decision would lead to the most important moment of her life. The next 3 days passed in a blur of circuit boards, diagnostic equipment, and software code. Sarah worked from dawn until well after dark, methodically testing and updating the communication systems on every F-22 Raptor in the first fighter wing's inventory. It was exhausting work, but also deeply satisfying in a way that her usual projects never were. Each aircraft had its own personality, she discovered. Some had been flown hard by aggressive pilots and showed wear patterns that told stories of countless training missions and deployments. Others were newer, still pristine and eager, like young racehorses waiting for their chance to run. But all of them shared the same fundamental problem with their communication systems, and all of them responded to her software fixes exactly as she had predicted. By Thursday afternoon, Sarah had completed her work on 16 aircraft, with only 2 more to go. She was crawling through the electronics bay of tail number 05-4099, a veteran aircraft that belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thunder Williams, when she heard voices approaching from outside the hangar. "I'm telling you, this civilian contractor is something special," came Lisa Rodriguez's voice. "She found a problem that our best maintenance guys couldn't even identify, and she's fixing it faster than anyone thought possible." "Phoenix is right," replied a male voice that Sarah didn't recognize. "I flew 4086 yesterday after she finished working on it." The comms were crystal clear, even during a 9G turn that should have dropped every signal from here to Norfolk. Sarah paused in her work, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction. It wasn't often that she received such direct praise for her technical skills, especially from people whose lives depended on the equipment she maintained. "What's her story?" asked another voice. "She doesn't seem like your typical defense contractor." "I don't think she's typical anything," Lisa replied. "Did you know she helped design these communication systems when she was fresh out of college?" "She knows this aircraft better than some people who've been flying it for years." Sarah smiled to herself as she continued working. She had never thought of herself as particularly remarkable, but hearing these accomplished pilots discuss her work with such respect was both flattering and slightly overwhelming. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Sarah's temporary workspace in Hangar 7. She was running final diagnostics on the last aircraft when a man in an immaculate flight suit approached her workstation. His rank insignia identified him as a full colonel, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to command. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Colonel David Spike Anderson, commanding officer of the 1st Fighter Wing. I wanted to personally thank you for the outstanding work you've done this week." Sarah stood up quickly, wiping her hands on a shop towel before shaking the colonel's hand. "Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to work on these aircraft. Major Harrison tells me you've solved the problem that's been plaguing us for weeks," Anderson continued. "More importantly, you've done it in a way that shows real understanding of how we operate. That's not something we see from every contractor who comes through here." "I just tried to approach it from the pilot's perspective," Sarah replied. "The communication systems have to work flawlessly under the most demanding conditions. Anything less than perfect isn't good enough." Anderson nodded approvingly. That's exactly the attitude we need from our support personnel. Tell me, have you given any thought to what you might want to do after this assignment? The question caught Sarah off guard. I haven't really thought about it, sir. I suppose I'll go back to my regular rotation of projects. What if I told you we might have a position available here at Langley? Something permanent, working directly with our squadron on advanced communication systems development? Sarah stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. You're offering me a job? I'm exploring possibilities, Anderson said carefully. We need people who understand both the technology and the operational requirements. You've demonstrated both this week. If you're interested, I could put you in touch with the right people. Before Sarah could respond, the hangar's public address system crackled to life. Attention on the flight line. All personnel prepare for immediate launch. Scramble, scramble, scramble. This is not a drill. Immediately, the entire hangar transformed. Pilots came running from all directions, pulling on helmets and grabbing equipment with the smooth efficiency of countless practice sessions. Maintenance crews scattered to their assigned aircraft, performing final checks and removing safety equipment with lightning speed. Real-world mission, Anderson explained tersely, his casual demeanor instantly replaced by focused intensity. Looks like somebody's decided to test our response time today. Sarah watched in fascination as the hangar became a choreographed dance of controlled urgency. Within minutes, engines were starting up, pilots were strapping into their cockpits, and the first F-22s were rolling toward the runway. The sound was incredible, not just loud, but felt as much as heard, a deep thrumming that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Phoenix, Ghost, Thunder, and Viper are on today's alert, Anderson said, watching his pilots prepare for launch. Probably just another intercept mission, Russian bombers testing our response time, or maybe a civilian aircraft that's gone off course. But you never know. Sarah found herself holding her breath as she watched Lisa Rodriguez taxi her aircraft toward the runway. Through the canopy, she could see Lisa running through her final checks with the calm professionalism of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. But Sarah also knew that every scramble carried real risks, that every time these pilots launched on a mission, there was a chance they might not come back. The 4 F-22s took off in pairs, their afterburners lighting up the sky like controlled lightning. Within seconds, they had disappeared into the clouds, leaving behind only the echoing thunder of their passage. The hangar, which had been so full of noise and activity just moments before, suddenly seemed empty and quiet. How long will they be gone? Sarah asked. Depends on what they find up there, Anderson replied. Could be 30 minutes, could be several hours. That's the nature of air defense, you go when called, and you stay as long as needed. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon finishing her work on the final aircraft, but her mind kept drifting to the 4 pilots somewhere overhead. She found herself checking the time frequently, wondering where they were and what they were doing. It wasn't until late that afternoon that she heard the distinctive sound of F-22 engines returning home. One by one, the aircraft landed and taxied back to their parking spots. Sarah watched through the hangar windows as the pilots climbed out of their cockpits, their movements showing the particular fatigue that came from hours of high-stress flying. Lisa was among the last to shut down her engines, and Sarah noticed that she sat in her cockpit for an extra moment before beginning her post-flight routine. 20 minutes later, Lisa appeared in the hangar, still wearing her flight suit but with her helmet tucked under her arm. She looked tired but exhilarated, with the particular glow that Sarah had noticed some pilots got after completing challenging missions. How did it go? Sarah asked. Russian Bear bombers, Lisa replied, setting down her helmet and pulling off her gloves. 2 of them, approaching from the northeast. We intercepted them about 200 miles out and escorted them away from U.S. airspace. Fairly routine stuff, but they were flying some new electronic warfare pods that we hadn't seen before. Were you able to communicate clearly throughout the mission? Lisa grinned. Like crystal. Whatever you did to our comms, it worked perfectly. I was talking to Thunder during a 6G climbing turn, and it sounded like he was sitting next to me in the same room. The Russians probably wondered why we were suddenly so chatty. Sarah felt a surge of pride. Her work had contributed directly to a real mission, helped ensure that American pilots could protect their country's airspace. It was the kind of immediate, meaningful impact she had always hoped her career would have. Listen, Lisa continued, about tomorrow's barbecue, you're still coming, right? Because after today, everyone wants to meet the person who fixed our radio problems. Sarah hesitated for only a moment. Yes, I'll be there. Saturday afternoon found Sarah standing in the backyard of Major Harrison's off-base home, holding a beer she hadn't touched and trying to look more comfortable than she felt. The gathering was exactly as Lisa had described, not a wild party, but a relaxed social event where squadron members and their families could unwind together. Children ran around the yard playing games while their parents talked shop and tended to grills loaded with hamburgers and hot dogs. Spouses shared stories about the challenges of military life while pilots argued good-naturedly about flying techniques and aircraft performance. It was, Sarah realized, a glimpse into a world she had never experienced, a community of people bound together by shared risks and common purpose. You look lost, said a voice beside her. Sarah turned to see a woman about her own age with shoulder-length auburn hair and an easy smile. I'm Jennifer Harrison, Tom's wife. You must be the famous Sarah Mitchell who saved our pilots from radio silence. Sarah shook her hand gratefully. I don't know about famous, but, yes, I'm Sarah. Thanks for including me in this. Are you kidding? Tom's been talking about you all week. He says you solved in 2 days a problem that's been driving him crazy for months. In this business, that makes you practically a superhero. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found herself gradually relaxing and actually enjoying the company. The pilots and their families were warm and welcoming, eager to hear about her work and genuinely interested in her perspective on their aircraft. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was part of a real community rather than just an outsider looking in. Sarah! Lisa called from across the yard. Come over here. I want you to meet someone. Sarah made her way through the crowd to where Lisa was standing with a tall, distinguished-looking man in civilian clothes. Despite his casual attire, something about his bearing suggested military background. Sarah, this is Brigadier General Robert Mackenzie, retired, Lisa said. Bob, this is the engineer I was telling you about. General Mackenzie shook Sarah's hand with a firm grip and looked at her with sharp, intelligent eyes. Lisa tells me you've revolutionized their communication capabilities in just 1 week. That's impressive work. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied. I was just doing my job. No, you weren't, Mackenzie said with a smile. Doing your job would have been running standard diagnostics and recommending that they contact the manufacturer. What you did was solve a complex problem that nobody else could figure out. There's a difference. They talked for several minutes about Sarah's work and her background in military aviation systems. General Mackenzie listened intently, asking probing questions that demonstrated his deep understanding of both technology and military operations. Tell me, he said eventually, have you ever considered military service yourself? The question hit Sarah like a bolt of lightning. I thought about it when I was younger, she admitted. I wanted to be a pilot, actually. But people told me it was too difficult, too competitive. People tell lots of folks that flying is too difficult, Mackenzie replied. But the people who succeed are the ones who don't listen to that advice. How old are you now? 34. Mackenzie nodded thoughtfully. Still well within the age limits for Air Force service, especially with your technical background. Have you ever considered that there might be paths into military aviation that don't require going through the traditional academy route? Sarah stared at him, not sure what he was suggesting. I'm not sure I understand. Direct commission programs, Mackenzie explained. The Air Force has always needed technically skilled officers who can bridge the gap between engineering and operations. Someone with your background and demonstrated abilities might be exactly what they're looking for. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of someone tapping a beer bottle with a metal spoon. Major Harrison was standing on his back deck, calling for attention. Before everyone gets too comfortable, he announced, I wanted to take a minute to formally thank someone who's made a real difference for our squadron this week. Sarah Mitchell came to Langley to solve what we thought was a simple maintenance problem, and, instead she's given us capabilities we didn't even know we were missing. The crowd turned towards Sarah, who felt her face reddening with embarrassment and pride. But, more than that, Harrison continued, she's shown the kind of dedication and expertise that exemplifies the very best of military-civilian cooperation. So I'd like to propose a toast to Sarah Mitchell, honorary member of the 1st Fighter Wing. The crowd raised their drinks and echoed the toast, and Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had never been the center of attention like this, never had her work acknowledged so publicly and enthusiastically. It was overwhelming and wonderful at the same time. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Sarah found herself sitting on Harrison's back deck with Lisa, watching the sun set over the Virginia landscape. The two women had talked throughout the afternoon, and Sarah had been surprised to discover how much they had in common despite their very different career paths. Can I ask you something personal? Lisa said, taking a sip of her beer. Sure. Do you ever regret not pursuing flying when you were younger? You seem like you would have made a good pilot. Sarah considered the question carefully. I used to regret it all the time, she said finally. I spent years wondering what my life would have been like if I had been braver, more willing to take risks. But this week has made me think differently about it. How so? Meeting all of you, working on your aircraft, being part of something important, I realized that there are lots of ways to serve, lots of ways to make a difference. Maybe I wasn't meant to be a pilot, but maybe I was meant to be the person who makes sure pilots like you can do your job safely. Lisa smiled. That's a pretty mature way to look at it. But, it's not too late. General Mackenzie wasn't just making conversation when he talked about direct commission programs. If you were serious about it, there are still paths into military aviation. At 34? Age is just a number. I know plenty of pilots who didn't start flying until their 30s. What matters is aptitude, dedication, and the willingness to push yourself beyond what you thought was possible. From what I've seen this week, you have all of those qualities. As Sarah drove back to her hotel that night, her mind was spinning with possibilities she had never seriously considered. The conversation with General Mackenzie had planted a seed that was already beginning to grow. For the first time in years, she was thinking about her future in terms of adventure and purpose rather than just steady employment and retirement planning. Could she really join the Air Force at 34? Could she learn to fly, maybe even become a pilot herself? The questions seemed almost too fantastic to consider seriously, but the more she thought about them, the more real they became. Sarah Mitchell, the quiet contractor who had spent her career working behind the scenes, was beginning to imagine a very different future for herself. And, for the first time since she was a little girl pretending to fly fighter jets in her backyard, that future looked not just possible, but inevitable. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Sarah had returned to her normal routine in Colorado. She was sitting in her cubicle at Advanced Communications Systems, working on a routine maintenance protocol for transport aircraft communication systems, when her desk phone rang. Sarah Mitchell speaking, she answered, expecting another technical question from a field technician or maybe her supervisor with a new assignment. Ms. Mitchell, this is Colonel Patricia Yates from Air Force Personnel Center. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had submitted an application for direct commission into the Air Force 2 weeks earlier, following up on her conversations with General Mackenzie and Lisa Rodriguez. But she hadn't expected to hear anything back so soon. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied, quickly saving her work and minimizing her computer screen. I have time. I'm calling regarding your application for direct commission as a communications officer. Your background and the recommendations we've received are quite impressive. General Mackenzie spoke very highly of your work at Langley, and Colonel Anderson has specifically requested that you be considered for a position with the 1st Fighter Wing. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. That's very kind of them to say. It's more than kind, it's remarkable, Colonel Yates continued. We don't often get requests from wing commanders for specific individuals, especially civilians. Your work must have made quite an impression. For the next 15 minutes, Colonel Yates explained the direct commission process, the training requirements, and the timeline for Sarah's potential entry into the Air Force. If accepted, Sarah would attend a compressed officer training program specifically designed for professionals joining the military later in their careers. After that, she would complete specialized training in military communication systems and, then, be assigned to her first duty station, which, if Colonel Anderson got his way, would be back at Langley Air Force Base. The board will meet next month to review applications, Colonel Yates concluded. Based on what I've seen, I'm optimistic about your chances. Are you still interested in pursuing this opportunity? Sarah took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, she had been a quiet contractor working on routine projects, invisible to almost everyone around her. Now the Air Force was actively recruiting her for a position that would change everything about her life. Yes, ma'am, she said without hesitation. I'm very interested. After hanging up, Sarah sat staring at her computer screen for several minutes, not really seeing the technical diagrams and code fragments displayed there. Everything was happening so fast. 6 months ago, the biggest decision in her life had been whether to upgrade her apartment's cable package. Now she was potentially weeks away from becoming an Air Force officer. That evening, Sarah called her parents to tell them about the opportunity. The conversation did not go as she had hoped. The military, her mother said, her voice rising with concern. Sarah, you have a good job, a stable life. Why would you want to throw that away for something so dangerous? It's not dangerous, Mom, Sarah replied, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. I'd be working on communication systems, just like I do now. The only difference is I'd be doing it in uniform. But, you could be deployed overseas, her father interjected. You could end up in some war zone working on broken radios while people are shooting at you. Sarah tried to explain what she had learned about Air Force communication officers, how their work was crucial to mission success but rarely involved direct combat exposure. But, her parents' concerns weren't really about the specific risks of her potential job, they were about their daughter abandoning a safe, predictable path for something unknown and challenging. I just don't understand why you want to do this, her mother said finally. You've never been interested in the military before. That wasn't true, but Sarah didn't bother to correct her. Her parents had forgotten, or chosen not to remember, her childhood dreams of flying fighter jets. They had encouraged her to be practical, to make safe choices, and, for most of her adult life, she had followed their advice. But, the past month at Langley had shown her what she had been missing. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself thinking constantly about her potential future in the Air Force. She researched everything she could find about officer training, about communication career fields, about life on military bases. She read memoirs by military officers, watched documentaries about Air Force operations, and even started a physical fitness routine to prepare for the demands of military training. Most importantly, she stayed in touch with Lisa Rodriguez and several other members of the 1st Fighter Wing. Their weekly phone calls and emails gave her insights into military life that no amount of research could provide. They told her about the challenges, the long hours, the frequent moves, the bureaucracy that sometimes made simple tasks frustratingly complex. But they also told her about the rewards, the sense of purpose, the camaraderie, the knowledge that their work contributed directly to national defense. "You're going to love it," Lisa told her during one of their conversations. "The Air Force needs people like you, smart, dedicated, willing to think outside the box. And, selfishly, we'd love to have you back at Langley permanently. You fit in with our squadron like you'd been there for years." The call from Colonel Yates came on a Friday afternoon in early November. Sarah was in the middle of a project meeting when her phone buzzed with a text message, "Please call me as soon as possible. Good news to share." Sarah excused herself from the meeting and found an empty conference room where she could speak privately. Her hands were shaking slightly as she dialed Colonel Yates' number. "Ms. Mitchell," Colonel Yates said without preamble, "congratulations. The board has approved your application for direct commission as a first lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Your training starts January 15th at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama." Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed by a mixture of excitement and terror. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I won't let you down." "I'm sure you won't. You'll receive your orders and travel instructions within the next week. Welcome to the Air Force, Lieutenant Mitchell." After hanging up, Sarah sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In 2 months, she would be wearing an Air Force uniform and learning to be a military officer. In 6 months, if everything went according to plan, she would be back at Langley Air Force Base as a permanent member of the 1st Fighter Wing. The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah gave notice at her job, sold most of her furniture, and spent countless hours studying military customs, Air Force history, and communication systems doctrine. She intensified her fitness routine, knowing that officer training would be physically demanding despite her age and professional background. Her parents remained concerned but supportive, and Sarah's supervisor at Advanced Communications Systems was surprisingly understanding about her decision to leave for military service. "I've seen a lot of engineers come and go," he told her on her last day. "Most of them are just looking for better pay or easier work. You're the first one I've met who's leaving because she found something worth believing in." Officer training school at Maxwell Air Force Base was everything Sarah had expected and nothing she was prepared for. The physical training was grueling, the academic requirements were extensive, and the military discipline was a constant adjustment for someone who had spent her entire adult life as a civilian. But Sarah thrived in ways that surprised even her. Her technical background made her a natural leader in academic subjects, and her quiet determination earned her the respect of both her instructors and her fellow candidates. For the first time in her life, she was part of a group of people who were all working toward the same goal, all committed to something larger than themselves. The other candidates came from diverse backgrounds: lawyers, doctors, engineers, business professionals, but they all shared a common desire to serve their country in uniform. Sarah found herself forming friendships more easily than she had since college, bonded with her classmates by shared challenges and common purpose. The graduation ceremony was held on a crisp Friday morning in April. Sarah's parents had flown in from Colorado to watch their daughter receive her commission as a United States Air Force officer. As she stood with her class, raising her right hand to take the oath of office, Sarah felt a sense of completion that she had never experienced before. "I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic," she recited along with her classmates. "That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God." After the ceremony, as Sarah pinned her new second lieutenant's bars onto her uniform, her mother approached with tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I was wrong to try to talk you out of this. You look like you belong here." Sarah hugged her mother, feeling a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying finally lift from her shoulders. For the first time, her parents saw her not as someone who needed protection from the world's dangers, but as someone capable of facing those dangers in service of something greater. 2 weeks later, Second Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell reported to her first assignment, Communications Officer, 1st Fighter Wing, Langley Air Force Base. As she drove through the main gate, this time as a permanent resident rather than a visitor, she felt like she was coming home. Major Harrison, now Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, met her at the wing headquarters. "Welcome back, Lieutenant Mitchell," he said with a broad smile. "Ready to get back to work?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, and meant it completely. Her first day back at Langley was a reunion with people who had become more than colleagues during her brief visit 8 months earlier. Lisa Rodriguez, now promoted to major, gave her an enthusiastic hug that would have been inappropriate between a civilian contractor and a military officer but was perfectly natural between two Air Force officers. "I can't believe you actually did it," Lisa said, examining Sarah's new uniform with obvious approval. "You look like you were born to wear that uniform." Sarah's new office was in the same building where she had first met Major Harrison, but now she had a permanent desk, her own computer, and, most importantly, a sense of belonging. Her job would involve managing all communication systems for the fighter wing, working directly with pilots and maintenance crews to ensure that the technological marvels she had helped design continued to function flawlessly. But, beyond the technical responsibilities, Sarah had found something she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it, a purpose that went beyond personal achievement, a community that valued her contributions, and the knowledge that her work made a real difference in the world. That first evening, as she walked across the flight line toward her new base housing assignment, Sarah paused to watch an F-22 Raptor taking off for a training mission. The pilot was someone she probably knew by now, flying an aircraft whose communication systems she was responsible for maintaining. In a few years, if everything continued according to the plan that was already taking shape in her mind, she might even be the pilot herself. For now, though, she was exactly where she needed to be, Second Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Communications Officer, 1st Fighter Wing. She had traded her invisible life as a civilian contractor for a visible role as a guardian of American airspace, and, for the first time since childhood, she was truly happy with the person she saw reflected in her identity. 3 years had passed since Sarah first walked through the gates of Langley Air Force Base as a civilian contractor. Now Captain Sarah Echo Mitchell stood on the tarmac at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, watching ground crews prepare her F-22 Raptor for what would become the most important mission of her life. The journey from communications officer to fighter pilot had been longer and more challenging than anything Sarah had ever attempted. After proving herself as one of the most competent communications officers in the Air Force, she had applied for and been accepted into undergraduate pilot training. At 37, she was older than most of her classmates, but her technical background and unwavering determination had carried her through the rigorous program. Her call sign Echo had come from her background in communications, Echo being radio terminology for the letter E, and a reference to her ability to make complex technical concepts clear to pilots who needed to understand their aircraft systems. The name stuck because Sarah had a talent for helping other pilots troubleshoot equipment problems during missions, becoming the echo of technical knowledge that everyone could rely on. Now, after 18 months of intensive flight training and another year building experience in the F-22, Sarah was deployed with the 1st Fighter Wing on a NATO exercise that had suddenly become much more serious. Intelligence reports indicated that a hostile nation was preparing to test American resolve by probing European airspace with advanced stealth aircraft of their own. "Echo, you ready for this?" called Major Lisa Phoenix Rodriguez, who was now the squadron's operations officer and Sarah's flight lead for today's mission. Lisa had become more than a colleague over the years, she was Sarah's mentor, her closest friend, and the person most responsible for Sarah's transformation from invisible contractor to confident fighter pilot. "Ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, running through her pre-flight checklist one final time. Her aircraft, tail number 05-4107, had been her regular mount for the past 6 months. She knew every sound it made, every quirk in its handling characteristics, every nuance of its advanced systems. The mission briefing had been unlike anything Sarah had experienced during training or routine operations. Instead of the usual practice scenarios and predetermined target areas, today they were launching on a real-world intercept mission. Radar stations across Eastern Europe had detected multiple unidentified aircraft approaching NATO airspace, and the F-22s from Langley were being scrambled to investigate. "All Viper flight, this is Ramstein Control," came the voice over Sarah's radio. "You are cleared for takeoff. Proceed to assigned patrol area and await further instructions." Sarah's heart rate increased as she advanced the throttles and felt her aircraft surge forward. Even after all her training and experience, takeoff still gave her a thrill that never got old. The F-22 leaped off the runway with the eager power of a thoroughbred horse, climbing rapidly into the gray European sky. "Viper flight, check in," Phoenix called as they reached their initial altitude. "Viper 2, replied Lieutenant Jake Ghost Morrison, who was flying Sarah's wing. "Viper 3, Sarah responded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Viper 4, concluded Captain Marcus Thunder Williams. For F-22 Raptors were now heading east toward the potential threat, their stealth characteristics making them nearly invisible to enemy radar. Sarah checked her instruments and this was no longer a training mission or a routine patrol. Somewhere ahead of them, foreign aircraft had violated the airspace of America's allies, and the F-22s were being vectored to intercept them. "Copy Magic, Vector 090, Angels 30, weapons tight," Phoenix acknowledged. "Viper flight, spread out and maintain stealth protocols." The 4 Raptors adjusted their formation, spacing themselves several miles apart to maximize their sensor coverage while remaining undetectable to enemy radar. Sarah checked her air-to-air missiles and cannon systems, ensuring they were ready for use if the situation escalated beyond a simple intercept. "Viper 3, this is Magic. We're showing multiple targets on your nose, 40 miles and closing. Count 6 bogies in loose formation." Sarah's radar display lit up with contact symbols as her F-22's sophisticated sensors detected the approaching aircraft. 6 contacts, flying in a formation that suggested military rather than civilian aircraft. Her training kicked in, and she began analyzing their flight path, speed, and altitude to determine their intentions. "Magic, Viper 3 has contact on 6 bogies. They appear to be military aircraft, possibly fighters. Recommend we attempt radio contact before proceeding." "Roger, Viper 3. You are cleared to attempt radio contact on guard frequency." Sarah switched to the international emergency frequency and transmitted in clear, professional English, "Unknown aircraft approaching NATO airspace. This is United States Air Force F-22. You are entering restricted airspace. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." Silence. She tried again, this time in Russian, using phrases she had learned during her intelligence briefings. Still no response. "Magic, Viper 3. No response to radio calls in English or Russian. Bogies continuing on current heading toward NATO airspace. Copy, Viper 3. You are cleared to close for visual identification. Rules of engagement remain weapons tight unless threatened." Sarah's mouth went dry. She was about to come face to face with potentially hostile aircraft, flying one of America's most advanced fighters in a situation that could escalate from diplomatic incident to armed conflict in seconds. "Viper flight, close on the bogies for visual ID," Phoenix commanded. "Stay alert and be ready for anything." As Sarah maneuvered her F-22 closer to the unidentified aircraft, she could see them clearly for the first time. 6 sleek, angular fighters that she recognized as advanced foreign stealth aircraft. They were flying in a tight formation, maintaining radio silence, and showing no signs of changing course despite being in NATO airspace. Magic, Viper 3 has visual on 6 hostile stealth fighters. They are maintaining course and speed, no response to radio calls. Request instructions. Viper 3, you are cleared to shadow the bogies and report any hostile actions. Diplomatic channels are attempting to establish contact with their government. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah and her squadron mates flew an intricate dance with the foreign aircraft. They maintained visual contact while staying far enough away to avoid being considered threatening, but close enough to respond if the situation turned hostile. It was a delicate balance that required all of Sarah's flying skills and tactical knowledge. The foreign pilots were clearly aware of the F-22's presence. Their aircraft were too advanced not to have detected the Raptors despite their stealth characteristics. But they maintained their course and speed, neither acknowledging the American aircraft nor taking any overtly hostile actions. Then, everything changed. Viper flight, this is magic. We're detecting missile launches from the bogey formation. Multiple missiles in the air, targeted at civilian airliner Flight 847. You are weapons free, repeat, weapons free. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The foreign aircraft had just launched missiles at a civilian passenger aircraft, hundreds of innocent people who had no part in whatever military or political game was being played at 40,000 feet. Viper 3, engaging. Sarah called, rolling her F-22 into an aggressive turn toward the nearest enemy aircraft. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, selecting air-to-air missiles and locking onto her target. The next few minutes were a blur of high-speed maneuvering, missile launches, and radio calls. Sarah found herself in the middle of an aerial battle that required every skill she had developed during years of training. Her F-22 performed flawlessly, responding to her controls like an extension of her own body. Fox 3, she called, launching an AMRAAM missile at an enemy aircraft that was lining up for another shot at the airliner. Her missile found its target, and she watched the enemy fighter explode in a ball of fire and debris. But there was no time to celebrate. Another enemy aircraft was maneuvering onto her tail, and she had to brake hard left to avoid his missile shot. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Within 5 minutes, 3 enemy aircraft had been shot down by the F-22s, while the remaining 3 had fled back toward their own airspace. The civilian airliner, though damaged by the initial missile attack, was able to continue to its destination with no loss of life. All Viper aircraft, this is magic. Well done. RTB when ready. As Sarah turned her aircraft toward home, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. She had just participated in her first aerial combat, successfully defending civilian lives against a hostile attack. But she had also taken human lives, something that no amount of training could fully prepare her for. The flight back to Ramstein was subdued, with minimal radio chatter between the 4 F-22 pilots. Each of them was processing what had just happened, coming to terms with the reality that their training and preparation had just been tested in the most serious way possible. After landing and completing their post-flight debriefings, Sarah found herself sitting alone in her quarters, staring out the window at the German countryside. 3 years ago, she had been an invisible contractor riding in seat 13F of a commercial airliner, dreaming of adventure but convinced it would never come. Now she was Captain Sarah Echo Mitchell, F-22 pilot, defender of NATO airspace, and someone who had just proven herself in aerial combat. The transformation seemed impossible even to her, as if she was reading about someone else's life rather than living her own. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Lisa Rodriguez entered, still wearing her flight suit and carrying 2 cups of coffee. "How are you holding up?" Lisa asked, settling into the chair across from Sarah. "I'm not sure," Sarah replied honestly. Part of me feels like I should be celebrating. We completed our mission, saved those civilians, and everyone made it home safely. But part of me can't stop thinking about the pilots and those aircraft we shot down." Lisa nodded understandingly. "It never gets easier, taking lives, even when you know it's necessary. But what you did today was protect innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. That's what we're here for." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, two Air Force officers processing the reality of their profession. Finally, Lisa spoke again. "You know, when I first met you at Langley 4 years ago, I thought you were just another contractor who would fix our radios and disappear. I never imagined you would end up here, flying the same aircraft you used to maintain." Sarah smiled for the first time since the mission. "Neither did I. A year ago, I was working on communication systems in an office cubicle. Today I used those same systems to coordinate a successful air-to-air engagement. Life has a funny way of surprising you." The next morning brought an unexpected summons to the wing commander's office. Sarah reported in her dress uniform, uncertain what to expect but prepared for anything from official commendation to formal investigation of her actions during the previous day's engagement. "Captain Mitchell, please have a seat," said Colonel David Anderson, who had followed the 1st Fighter Wing to its deployment in Germany. "I want to personally congratulate you on your performance yesterday. Your actions helped save hundreds of civilian lives." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "I was just doing my job." "You were doing much more than that," Anderson continued. "Your technical background allowed you to optimize your aircraft's performance in ways that contributed directly to mission success. And your flying skills under combat conditions were exceptional for someone with relatively little experience." Anderson leaned forward in his chair. "Captain Mitchell, how would you feel about attending the Air Force test?"